The crash. Captain Paul Scott navigated his sleek starship, the ISS Defiant, through the void of an unexplored sector. His ship jolted as it dropped out of FTL, near a rocky, barren planet with no signs of civilization. Suddenly, a faint distress ping lit up on his sensors, pulsing weakly from somewhere on the surface below. Curiosity piqued. Paul fired his thrusters and descended through the thin atmosphere, wind buffeting his hull. Cresting over jagged mountains, Paul spotted the scattered debris of an unfamiliar alien vessel strewn across a plateau. He set the Defiant down on its landing gear nearby and grabbed his pulse rifle, exiting the airlock. Paul approached the wreckage cautiously, senses alert for any sign of a trap or ambush. But as he drew closer, he spotted a crumpled form lying motionless amidst the twisted metal. It was an alien female, her purple skin gashed open and oozing dark blood. Her left leg was crushed under a chunk of hull plating. Paul's medic training kicked in, and he hurried to her side, scanning for life signs. She was alive, but barely. Part of him screamed to leave her, that this wasn't his problem. But seeing her broken body, Paul knew he couldn't abandon her to a slow, lonely death on this remote rock. Gritting his teeth, Paul activated his exosuit's enhanced strength mode. Metal groaned as he heaved the wreckage off her ruined leg. Scooping the limp alien into his arms, Paul carried her back to his ship as quickly as he dared. In the Defiant's cramped infirmary, he laid her on the table and activated the autodock. But as the machine scanned her, it flashed a red warning. Her injuries were too severe. She needed a real doctor fast, or she wouldn't survive the night. Paul stared at her unconscious face, alien yet strangely beautiful. He didn't know who she was or how she'd gotten here, but he knew he had to try to save her. Returning to the cockpit, Paul plotted a course for the nearest human outpost and punched the FTL, praying he'd get there in time. The threat. Paul's shoulders slumped, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He looked down at Tyro's bruised face, her breathing now steady. Satisfied the autodock had stabilized her for the moment, Paul turned to exit the infirmary, needing to get them to safety. But a piercing alarm suddenly reverberated through the small room. His head snapped up. What the hell? Paul rushed to a glowing console, hands flying over the interface. He pulled up the long-range sensors, and his blood froze. A Heron warship, bristling with weapons, had just dropped out of FTL near the outpost. They were coming in hot. Human, what is happening? Tyro's raspy voice demanded from behind him. Paul whirled to see her struggling to sit up, eyes wide with fear as the alarms continued blaring. He hesitated, not wanting to reveal the direness of their predicament to his injured patient. It's nothing. Just lay back down and let the autodock work. Do not lie to me. Tyro snarled, baring sharp teeth. I know those alarms. A ship approaches, and I doubt they come as friends. Paul sighed, rubbing his forehead. He reluctantly moved aside so she could see the pulsing red dot on the screen. It's a Heron warship. They just arrived in the system. Hey, calm down. Paul gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. You're in no condition to go anywhere, and I'm not about to hand you over to them. Tears welled in Tyro's eyes as she shook her head frantically. You don't understand. I fled. I deserted my post. They ordered me to slaughter helpless civilians on a world we conquered. Innocent people, children. I couldn't do it, so I ran, and the Heron do not tolerate deserters. They will execute me without mercy if they find me. Paul's jaw clenched as cold realization seeped into his bones. If the Heron knew she was here, if they boarded his ship, he couldn't let that happen. He'd risk everything to save this alien woman's life. He wouldn't abandon her to torture and death now, even if it meant making an enemy of her ruthless people. I won't let them take you, Tyro, he vowed solemnly. I'll protect you, whatever it takes. Tyro blinked up at him in shock. Why? Why would you risk yourself for me, an alien you barely know? Paul didn't hesitate. Because it's the right thing to do. A spark of something that might have been hope ignited in Tyro's eyes, But the ominous blip on the sensor screen drew closer with each passing second. The warship would reach them in minutes. The escape. The comms unit crackled and popped, the signal of an incoming transmission. Paul squeezed Tyro's fingers once before moving to answer the hail, praying to any gods that might listen that his desperate gambit would work. He had to make the Heron believe his lies, or everyone on this outpost would pay the price. With a deep breath, he opened the channel. Paul's finger hovered over the button to open the comm channel to the Heron warship. He glanced back at Tyro, seeing the fear in her eyes. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a hulking Heron commander, his face a mass of scars and piercings. "Human vessel, you will surrender the deserter Tyro to us immediately," the commander growled without preamble. Paul forced his voice to remain steady. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Tyro was killed in a crash. I only managed to recover her body." The Heron's eyes narrowed. "You lie. Our scans show a living Heron biosignature on your outpost." "Your scans are mistaken," Paul bluffed. "Tyro is dead. But if you insist, you're welcome to send a small boarding party to verify it for yourselves. My outpost's facilities are limited, so don't bring too many." The commander leaned forward, baring his fangs. "Very well, human. But if we find you have deceived us, the consequences will be severe." The screen went black. Paul sagged, his knees weak with relief, but there was no time to rest. He raced to the infirmary where Tyro lay. "We have to move now," he urged, helping her to her feet. "I bought us a little time, but not much." Tyro swayed, clutching her side. "I will only slow you down. Leave me." "Not a chance." Paul slung her arm over his shoulders, supporting her weight. They stumbled into the corridor, Tyro's breaths coming in pained gasps as they navigated the maze of hallways. Tyro's gaze bored into him. "Why are you doing this, risking your life for me? You could just hand me over and save yourself." Paul huffed a laugh. "Don't go singing my praises just yet. We're not out of this." A deafening boom rocked the outpost, alarms blaring to life. Paul's head snapped up, dread coiling in his gut. Over the comm, a voice crackled with static. "The Heron have breached the airlock. They're storming the outpost. A whole damn army of them." "I won't let them take you," he promised, grabbing a pulse rifle from the weapons locker. "And I won't let them slaughter the people here. I'll hold them off as long as I can." "Paul," Tyro's voice broke, "you can't fight them all. It's suicide." Paul's jaw clenched as he chambered around. "Then I'll take as many of those bastards with me as I can. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." Tyro reached for him, but he was already turning away, heart pounding, rifle clutched to his chest. Paul strode out to face the oncoming Heron horde, ready to make his final stand. The battle. Pulse blasts streaked through the air, scorching the walls as Paul ducked behind a crate. The Heron had breached the outpost's defenses, their hulking forms storming down the corridors with single-minded purpose. Paul leaned out from cover, squeezing off a burst from his rifle. A Heron warrior staggered, armor sparking before crumpling to the ground. But more took its place, heedless of their fallen comrade. Paul's heart pounded as he realized the civilians hadn't finished evacuating. He had to buy them more time. Rising to a crouch, he laid down suppressing fire, trying to funnel the Heron into a choke point. The aliens adapted quickly, splitting into two groups to flank him. Paul pivoted, blasting the nearest warrior, but another closed in from the side, energy blade humming. He turned too late, knowing he couldn't get his rifle up in time. Suddenly, the Heron jerked as a plasma bolt took it in the temple. It collapsed, revealing Tyro standing behind it, a salvaged Heron blaster in her hands. Her face was set with fierce determination. "I thought I told you to stay put," Paul snapped, even as relief flooded him, "and let you have all the fun." Tyro limped to his side, favoring her injured leg. Not a chance. They fell into a seamless rhythm, Tyro's precise shots complementing Paul's spray of suppressing fire. Heron fell before their onslaught, unable to advance in the face of the human and Heron combined skill. But more kept coming, an unending tide of armored bodies. Paul's rifle beeped, power cell nearly drained. He slammed his last backup cell home, knowing it wouldn't last long. "We can't hold them forever," he shouted over the din of battle. "Then we don't try," Tyro replied grimly. "The hangar bay is close. We get these bastards to chase us. Lead them away from the civilians." "We'll need a ship," he said, already moving. "I know just the one." Tyro's smile was sharp. "Bet the Heron won't expect us to steal one of theirs." They burst into the hangar in a hail of blaster fire, Heron hot on their heels. The angular gray bulk of a Heron shuttle squatted in the nearest berth, pulse blasts pinging off its armored hull as the pair sprinted up the ramp. "I'll manage." Tyro strapped into the gunner's chair, powering up the weapon systems. "Just get us in the black." The shuttle shuddered as Paul fired the thrusters, throwing them back against their restraints. The ship tore free of the hangar, Heron blasts streaking past the viewports. "Punch it," Tyro barked. Paul did, the shuttle's engines screaming as they clawed for open space. The boxy gray forms of Heron ships wheeled to pursue, cannons hammering their overtaxed shields. Tyro returned fire, the shuttle's guns thundering. An enemy ship bloomed into flame, but 3 more swept in to take its place. "They're still coming." Paul yanked them into a stomach-churning roll, barely evading a crackling ion blast. "I see that," Tyro snarled, hands dancing over the weapons console. Another pursuer fell away, sparks venting from its hull, but the Heron commander's ship bore down on them, its guns hammering shot after relentless shot into their shields. Alarms shrilled as the barriers flickered, taxed to their limit. Paul's mind raced, trying to formulate some plan, some way out of this, but everywhere he turned, the Heron were there, cutting off escape. They couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, the Heron would catch them, and when they did, he glanced back at Tyro, seeing his own weariness and desperation mirrored in her eyes. But beneath that, he saw a glimmer of something else, the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had first drawn him to her. She met his gaze, understanding passing between them. The Heron had hounded her, had slaughtered and terrorized, and now, together, they had a chance to strike back, to show this merciless foe that they would not go quietly. "I have an idea," Tyro said, voice hard with purpose, "but you're not going to like it." Paul's hands tightened on the controls as plasma blasts hammered at their shields. The commander's ship loomed on the view screen, death in every stark line of its hull. "I'm all ears," he said. "What did you have in mind?" Tyro told him. Paul swore, even as a fierce, reckless grin split his face. It was a plan born of desperation, of the knowledge that they had nothing left to lose. But if it worked, they'd strike a blow against the Heron that the brutes would never forget. "Let's do it," Paul growled. Tyro nodded, something like respect kindling in her eyes. Together, they bent over the shuttle controls, plotting the coordinates for a jump that would either save them or doom them forever. The plan. Paul's hands flew over the shuttle controls, sweat beading his brow as the roar of pursuing ships thundered behind them. Heron blasts scorched their shields, the jolts vibrating up through the deck plates. A massive asteroid field loomed ahead, a tumbling labyrinth of jagged rock. A desperate, reckless plan ignited in Paul's mind. "Hang on." He wrenched the control yoke, plunging the shuttle into the treacherous maze. Tyro's claws dug into her seat as the asteroids hurtled past, near misses shaking the hull. "Are you insane? We'll be pulverized." Paul's jaw clenched as he jinked and juked, narrowly dodging a spinning mountain of stone. "Those Heron boats are too bulky, too slow. They'll never follow us in here." On cue, a chasing ship clipped an asteroid, shearing off into a fiery pinwheel. 2 more slammed together with a titanic crunch, vanishing in a plume of flame and shrapnel. But the commander's vessel doggedly remained, casting through the rocks with single-minded fury. Tyro hissed, talons tapping her control board. I have an idea. Heron sensors have a weakness, an override frequency. If I can spoof it, make them think we're debris. Tortured screeches filled the cabin as yet another near miss scraped their hull. Paul gritted his teeth, G-forces slamming him as he corkscrewed around a tumbling asteroid. Whatever you're going to do it fast. The shuttle shuddered, alarms screeching. Shields down to 20%. Tyro worked furiously, fingers flying, eyes narrowed in concentration. With a final jab, she snarled in triumph. Got it. Broadcasting the false signal now. An eternity passed. The commander's guns hammered their failing shields. Then, silence. The Heron ships veered off, scanners sweeping, searching. They bought it. Paul sagged back, not quite believing. They think we're space junk. Never underestimate Heron arrogance, Tyro spat, or their stupidity. Paul angled them out of the asteroid field, watching the Heron return to the outpost. Satisfaction warred with worry for the civilians there, but one crisis at a time. We did it. We're clear. A smile cracked Paul's face, giddy relief bubbling in his veins. The console chose that moment to explode in a shower of sparks. The cabin lights flared, dimmed, then snuffed out entirely. Groaning, the shuttle's engines wound down with a descending whine. We've lost main power, Tyro snapped, her fists pummeling a dark, unresponsive board. Primaries are shot, secondaries failing. Hall stared at the looming sphere of a barren moon, their trajectory bending inexorably towards its pitted surface. Strap in, he ordered, hands already working to wrestle some control from the dying ship. Looks like we're setting her down, whether we want to or not. The shuttle hit atmosphere in a blazing shroud, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane as it knifed through angry gray clouds. Paul clutched the yoke in a white-knuckled grip, fighting to keep them level, to bleed off speed. A patchwork of craters and jagged hills rushed up to greet them. The terrain blurred. With a bone-jarring crunch, the shuttle belly flopped onto the unforgiving rock, plowing a 100-meter furrow before lurching to a stop. Ears ringing, Paul shook his head to clear it. He turned to Tyro, a quip about his landing skills on his lips, but froze. Slumped in her chair, a thin trail of blue blood seeped from the alien woman's temple. Her eyes were closed, her face as still as death. Tyro. No response. Fear clenched Paul's heart like a frozen fist. He lunged for her, fumbling to find a pulse, to feel breath against his cheek. There, the faintest, shallow rise of her chest. She lived still. Paul sagged, dizzy with relief. Now he just had to keep her that way. The ruins. Unstrapping from his chair, Paul gathered the limp Heron in his arms and kicked the buckled hatch. It screeched open, admitting a blast of frigid thin air. Overhead, unfamiliar stars glinted in a strange sky, cold and uncaring. A lonely wind moaned across alien hills, the sound eerie on this desolate world. But there, on the near horizon, angular towers jutted from the dust, too precise to be natural formations. Lights glimmered in those distant windows, signs of civilization, shelter, aid, hope. Cradling Tyro close, Paul took his first steps onto the bleak moon, striking out for those beckoning spires. Behind him, the gutted ruin of the shuttle crackled and popped, already forgotten. This place, wherever it was, would either be their salvation or their tomb. The wind howled, and Paul walked on into the unknown, Tyro a precious burden in his arms. Step by inexorable step, he trudged towards the promise of those distant lights, the stars his only witness and his only guide. The eerie towers loomed closer, alien angles and strange architecture, unsettling in the wan starlight. Paul's sore legs burned with each labored step, Tyro heavy in his aching arms. But he pushed on, teeth clenched against the pain. They had to make it. He had to get Tyro help. Nothing else mattered. Staggering up a scree-strewn hill, Paul reached the crumbling walls of the mysterious compound. Up close, it was clearly long abandoned. the metal pitted and scored, gaping holes blown in the structures by some ancient battle. Crabbing sideways, Paul squeezed through a torn gap, finding himself in dank, debris-choked corridors. Shadows hulked in the gloom, twisted wreckage and strange devices looming out of the dark. The air was stale, thick with a cloying scent that caught in Paul's throat. Somewhere deep in the ruin, the lights he'd seen from afar still glimmered. Holding Tyro tighter, he ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the oppressive darkness swallowing them. The lights drew him onward, past collapsed passages and strange, cyclopean chambers. His footsteps echoed in the sepulchral silence, Tyro's breathing a ragged counterpoint. A flicker of motion in the corner of his eye. Paul whirled, heart pounding, but only dancing shadows met his wild gaze. Unease prickled his skin, the sense of unseen eyes crawling his spine. He shook it off, pressing on with renewed urgency. With each step, the air grew thicker, fouler, a bitter metallic reek coating his tongue. The chamber was a charnel house, mounds of alien bones littering the floor, piled in choking drifts. Shattered equipment and strange devices lay strewn amidst the remains, as if torn apart by terrible force. Scorch marks and jagged holes pocked the walls, the cold violence of millennia past etched in stark relief. And there, on a raised platform in the center of the ossuary, the source of the lights, a towering structure of hoses, pipes, and blinking consoles, thrumming with malevolent purpose. Sickly fluids pulsed through transparent tubes, viscous and putrid. Paul's skin crawled, his every instinct screaming to flee this foul place. But Tyro shuddered in his grasp, her breath failing. Jaw clenched, Paul advanced into the bone-carpeted room, the sinister machine drawing him in like a fly to a spider's web. Reaching the dais, he eased Tyro down amongst the remains of the long dead, hands shaking as he fumbled for a medkit. A whir, a click, a rising hum. Paul spun, pulse rifle leaping into his hands, and found himself staring into the glowing optical sensors of a spindly robotic drone, skeletal limbs tipped with wicked blades. Behind it, a dozen more powered up, scuttling out of the dark on spidery legs, unlimbering weapons. They encircled the platform, cold and implacable. Paul's finger tightened on the trigger, eyes flickering from drone to drone, mind racing. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But he wouldn't let them take Tyro. He wouldn't fail her now. Snarling a wordless battle cry, Paul charged the deadly android phalanx, opening fire in a hail of plasma bolts. Tyro was depending on him. He would save her or die trying. The reckoning. Paul charged into the robotic phalanx, pulse rifle blazing. Plasma bolts stitched a line of destruction through the drones, scattering metallic limbs and sparking circuitry. He dropped into a slide, narrowly evading a scything blade, and came up firing, blasting the head off another android. Tyro leaped into the fray, Heron blaster spitting deadly energy. She moved with fluid grace, spinning and dodging, each shot finding a critical weak point. The drones fell before her onslaught, crashing to the bone-strewn floor in heaps of twisted metal. Together, the human and Heron fought their way deeper into the eerie complex, a trail of shattered robots marking their passage. Paul's muscles burned with fatigue, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he pushed on, fueled by desperation and adrenaline. At last, they burst into the central control room, a cavernous space dominated by towering consoles and flickering screens. Panting, Paul sealed the blast doors behind them, buying a moment's respite. "Okay, we're in," he said, scanning the alien controls. "Let's find out what these bastards are up to and shut it down." Tyro nodded grimly, moving to a glowing terminal. Her claws flew over the keys, deciphering the arcane Heron script. Suddenly, she hissed in shock, pupils slitting. "Paul, it's worse than we thought." She stepped back from the screen, a hologram blooming to life above it. Schematics and formulas scrolled past, each more horrifying than the last. The virus, in all its terrible glory, laid bare. "This thing," she said, voice tight, "it's not just deadly. It's adaptable, designed to infect and wipe out entire species while leaving the heron unscathed." Paul stared at the projection, ice crystallizing in his veins, a biological weapon of unimaginable scope and cruelty, tailor-made for genocide. "My God, we have to destroy it. Every last trace." He turned to the control panels, hands hovering over the unfamiliar keys. Tyro joined him, studying the outpost systems. There must be a way to purge the viral samples, overload the containment fail-safes, if we can just. Her claw jabbed a button. Instantly, alarm klaxons blared, crimson light pulsing in the dim chamber. A robotic voice boomed from unseen speakers. "Containment breach detected. Outpost self-destruct sequence initiated. 10 minutes to critical overload." Paul slammed a fist against the console. "We triggered some kind of fail-safe. The explosion will vaporize the surface, but there's no guarantee it will destroy the virus samples." Tyro said urgently, "They're stored in a specialized containment facility, designed to withstand even a direct blast." Paul ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "Then we need to get to that facility and physically destroy it. It's the only way to be sure." Tyro hesitated, then nodded. "I remember seeing the containment specs in my military briefings. It's deep in the sublevels. We have to hurry." They sprinted from the control room, following Tyro's directions through the labyrinthine corridors. The clock ticked inexorably down as they ran, each second an eternity. Rounding a corner, they skidded to a halt, coming face to face with a squad of heron warriors. The hulking aliens roared in challenge, energy blades igniting. "Intruders. The commander wants their heads." Paul and Tyro dove for cover as the heron opened fire, disruptor beams sizzling through the air. Robotic drones, drawn by the commotion, scuttled out of adjoining passages, forming a deadly crossfire. "We're trapped," Tyro snarled, returning fire from behind a sparking console. "We'll never reach the containment facility in time." Paul gritted his teeth, pulse rifle bucking in his grip as he dropped 2 drones. His gaze fell on a flickering control panel nearby, heron script scrolling across it. A desperate plan crystallized. He lunged for the panel, stabbing commands into the keys. With a tremendous groan, a massive blast door slammed down from the ceiling, cutting the corridor in 2. The heron howled in rage, pounding on the unyielding metal. The drones skittered and clawed but could not pass. "That won't hold them for long," Paul said, ejecting his rifle's spent power cell. "But it buys us a chance. Let's move." They raced onward, the drumbeat of the heron pursuing. At last, they reached a huge circular vault, its gleaming surface etched with dire alien warnings. "The containment facility," Tyro breathed. She keyed a complex code into the access panel, and the vault door ground open with a hiss of escaping pressure. Inside, rows of cylindrical tanks bubbled and churned, sickly green fluid roiling within. Pipes and hoses snaked between them, pulsing with viral slurry. Paul stared at the abominations, revulsion twisting his gut. Weapons of genocidal malice, hiding in plain sight. Tyro's eyes flashed with sudden understanding. "The virus, it's not just a weapon," she said, voice trembling. "It's the key to the heron's plans for galactic domination." Paul turned to her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Tyro's voice shook with growing horror. "The heron have been testing this virus on the worlds they conquer, perfecting it, evolving it. They mean to unleash it on a galactic scale and rule over the ashes." Cold realization settled in Paul's bones like lead. The scope of the heron's evil defied comprehension. The clang of boots on metal, drawing closer. The guttural snarls of the hunters, eager for blood. "We have to end this now." Paul unslung the satchel charge from his belt, keying the detonator. "We blow the tanks, collapse the chamber, bury this obscenity forever." Tyro nodded grimly, producing her own explosives. They moved among the tanks, placing the charges at critical structural points. The march of the heron echoed from the corridor, the screech and chitter of drones. "Charges set," Tyro called, backing toward the exit. 30 seconds. Paul armed the final detonator. He turned to run and found himself staring into the glowing eyes of a drone, its sickle claws raised to strike. Paul's eyes widened as the drone's blade slashed down. He rolled desperately, metal sparking against the deck plates where his neck had been an instant before. Coming up in a crouch, he fired point-blank into the machine's optical cluster. It staggered back, circuits sizzling. "Paul!" Tyro's warning shout. He whirled to see a hulking silhouette filling the doorway, a nightmarish figure in spiked armor, the Heron commander. "You thought you could destroy my life's work, human," the commander snarled, stalking forward. "Thought you could."